We can all go a lot further faster if we do it together.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Housing Insiders, the podcast for founders, builders, lenders, and regulators, and anyone who believes that everyone should be well housed. I am Jonathan Lawless.
And I'm Jeremy Potter. On Housing Insiders, we're hosting those conversations you won't hear anywhere else about how to make housing more innovative and attainable.
And again, we're proud to partner with Built Rewards to bring you these smart conversations. If you have an idea for a guest or show, or want to sponsor an episode, I always encourage you guys to email us at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com.
And if you like the show, the best thing you can do is give us a review, spread the word, share it. We want to make more of these podcast episodes for you and keep it going. So thank you for doing that.
So we have an amazing guest today who also is hailing from one of those great Midwestern cities that we love to talk about, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have Dennis Steigerwalt joining us. He is an entrepreneur, investor, and advisor specializing in housing construction technology and innovation in the built environment. I love that term, in the built environment. He serves as the president of the Housing Innovation Alliance, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about. And if he wasn't busy enough doing that, he is also the co-founder and partner at Build Tech VC Angel Group. They support founders and they help scale some of these bold innovations that we're always talking about in construction and property technology. He is a self-described small-scale developer that leverages and enables some of these technologies. He also, and this will be something we definitely will get into, he has helped advance the housing industry in Saudi Arabia, which is similar to Pittsburgh, but doing various things like market transformation programs, SABIC's Home of Innovation, and the National Building Technology Stimulus Initiative. So really, what an incredible resume, Dennis. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. Great to be here.
Yeah, Dennis, good to talk to you. I'm going to jump right in because, like John said, we have so much we want to get into. One of the reasons we wanted to talk to you was to really understand how do we do better talking across all the different pieces of housing and housing innovation. Often when you say housing innovation, the built environment, as John said in your intro, probably comes to mind first because supply is the house. Like that is the thing that you need to be able to sell or finance or do everything else around it. But often the built environment and the financing environment don't overlap that much. The policy environment doesn't overlap with both of those at the same time. And so we wanted to talk to you about that specifically. How is the Housing Innovation Alliance addressing that? What led you to do that? And what can we expect to, for those that aren't familiar with it, what can they expect to see from the Housing Innovation Alliance coming up?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that point. It's really all about crossing, being a boundary spanner, if you will. And I think that's where the real opportunity comes for innovation in this industry. The Housing Innovation Alliance is what I've described as a crowd accelerated innovation platform. We're all about identifying great success stories in the market, bringing those partners, shining a light on them, sharing their pains and gains, and then challenging others in our network to take that and grow on it, right? So we're constantly trying to sit on one another's shoulders to be taller within the industry, and then bringing that back and sharing it. So one of the most important things is we've created this safe space where folks can come in and be vulnerable, and again talk about not only the wins, but some of the hard-earned lessons that we've had on those journeys. And I think one of the most important things that we've done is we've created kind of this integrated market engagement program. So the idea is it's not a single moment in time where we all convene or get together and share those pain points, but it's this opportunity to reconnect throughout the course of the year so we can pull common threads throughout a series of gatherings and convenings that allow us to share thoughts and experiences on a number of different topics and connect with different audiences in different ways. We're known for our flagship Housing Innovation Summit, which, Jeremy, I know you've been a part of, and we're constantly innovating on that even and introducing, all right, so how do we take what we've done there, which is really more of a shareholders meeting, right? This is our most connected network members getting together and sharing case studies of what's worked, what's not, where can we get help? Here's what we need to work on together going forward, and really finding ways to aggregate and align resources. And then we introduced new concepts like the one I know that you were at earlier this year, Jonathan, with our National Housing Supply Summit, where we partnered with Housing Tech Ventures in DC, where we really wanted to create an opportunity for our industry to speak to Capitol Hill on what they need to help unlock housing supply and how we could really start working more collaboratively, taking examples that have worked at the state and local level and elevating that up to the federal level, right? And that was an opportunity to take our group outside of the conversations we typically have around the horizontal and vertical development piece and get into, like you described, Jonathan, those other key stakeholder groups that we want to connect with that'll help us unlock some of this opportunity. So for us, it's really continuously finding those audiences that we can engage with, providing them with the knowledge and insights that we have from looking 5 to 10 years out on the horizon, enlisting them in that journey with us, and then carrying them with us as we move forward to implement and continue to ideate on some of these market transformation strategies.
It's an awesome idea, and I assume the reason you're doing this is because there was a shortfall, in the industry related to this. And I always like to tell this funny story. I saw a Sesame Street rerun with my daughter from like 2004. The word of the day was innovation. Hey, innovation, So we talk about innovation a lot, and we certainly have talked about construction innovation for a long time. In your mind, is this idea of like bringing people together something that has been lacking, as we've talked about in the past? And maybe as a sort of second follow-up to that is like, how well is it going? Are you seeing the fruits of your labor and bringing these different people together? Is it creating sort of things happening at scale, whereas they wouldn't have in the past?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So we started in 2008 as an offshoot of the Department of Energy's Building America program. And it was a partnership between the Building America program and a firm located here in Pittsburgh called Abacus, which is a nationally recognized research and development firm focused on building system innovation. And the idea at that point was bringing together the largest building product manufacturers and some of the largest, highest volume builders to get ahead of the evolving energy code. So it was like helping to identify where are the product and process gaps that we need to overcome to achieve these evolving standards. Over time, it became about much more than energy performance, and it became much more about the broader business of innovation. And then it also became an opportunity to engage a much larger stakeholder group and engaging with different segments of the market. So I stepped in 2019 after an 8-year stint overseas. And at that point, I'll go through what we'll call now as kind of a refounding of the organization. We scaled it significantly. We grew from just about 200 members to where we're at 2,000 today. And I'd say when we started in 2008, there was almost nobody doing what we're doing. I think now there's a lot of different organizations that are focused on innovation in the built environment, but I don't know that anybody's focused 100% on housing the way that we are for market rate attainability and for the specific audience subset and cross section that we're working with. So I think we have a unique niche that we fill in that regard. But we also are great at collaborating with all those other groups because that's, for us, there's an abundance of opportunity out there to help shift the market, and it's going to take all of us working together to do that. As we know, the industry gets beat up a lot for this our slowness to adapt, but really it's you got to get the risk reward ratio to align, and you got to make sure that you have the right leadership in place to lead the change management that's required to move the mountains that we need to move. So I think collectively we've established a platform where we have the right people with the right mindset taking the right action to drive that. So I think that makes us a bit unique in a number of senses.
Yeah, and that covers a lot because I remember, as you mentioned, I was at several events. The one in Pittsburgh pops to mind because just at my table, you can probably go around and say, this is the only time, at least in events that I attend, that this group of people would be together, right? Everything from somebody who's thinking about insulating a house differently to thinking about materials, like a young engineering student who had just graduated from graduate school working on materials, to a fintech expert and a VC and a public home builder all at the same table talking. And I think that was representative to me of, wow, we're now really getting a lot across this group, not just at the event, but then across the industry. So I guess that leads me to my question of sort of what is coming up for you next? What are you seeing that you've added to the programming, or, what is the focus for Housing Innovation Alliance over the next 6-12 months? What will you be working on?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking that question. So the back half of the year is going to primarily be focused on us supporting some of our partners, our industry partners at their events. We're incredibly active in ULI, or the Urban Land Institute. I sit on the leadership team for one of the national product councils. So spring and fall meeting are always big ones for us. So fall meeting will be coming up here later in the year in San Francisco. We'll be there and have a bit of a presence, do some both programming integrated with ULI and then around that event itself. We'll be at Blueprint here in a few weeks. We're going to be partnering with the team from Ivory Innovations and Home Technology Ventures to host the Home Builders Kickoff Summit, which is an event that we've integrated into the Blueprint program. We started it kind of in a larger fashion last year, but it has its, it was really conceived maybe 2 years ago as a much small panel that's grown into quite a number of sessions and conversations. So we're looking forward to that. We're tied into some really interesting research that we're supporting HUD's Policy Development Research Group on, kind of directly related to accelerating the adoption of offsite construction and related building systems to unlock housing supply. So a lot of the travel the back half of the year and a lot of the market engagement that we're going to be leading is linked to that. I will say we're going to be refining some of the research work that we've done. I'm excited to say that by the time this comes out, we'll have released the fourth wave of the America at Home study research that we've partnered with the founding team on. I know we're going to get into this. I'm sure we'll get into this a little later. We'll talk about the Picket Fence, which was based off of wave 3 of that study. So now we have 16,000 data points on, how consumers' behavior has changed in terms of purchasing habits related to house and home over the last 5 years. So that's a proprietary data set that we've considered ourselves to be privileged to be a part of helping craft and actually action within the market through these concept homes and the reach that we have. So, and then after that, it's getting ready for the Builders Show. Right. So we got that one around the corner. That's going to be down in Orlando this year. We host our annual breakfast. So that's always a fun get together. Maybe it's a little selfish. I always got a little frustrated waiting for coffee and burritos in line at the show. And so I just figured I'll give it out to 200 of my best friends. So we get that event going. And it's a great place for any of your listeners if they want to kind of sync up with us. And then we're going to have our 2026 Housing Innovation Summit will be down in Charlotte next year. So we're finalizing dates now, but we're looking at that May, June timeframe. So we'll get those save the dates out here shortly. But we're excited to get down in the Charlotte market. It's such a hub of activity around the built environment and an opportunity to create a real innovation hub with building materials and related products, and certainly the financial aspects of the market, as you kind of alluded to earlier, within that corridor. So a lot of growth opportunity, a lot of members of our network super active down there. So I think it's going to be a great transition away from the event we just had in Pittsburgh and getting down there with a slightly larger group, but also in a very different market.
Actually, I'm really interested in what you mentioned about Charlotte, because one of the things I've thought a lot about in terms of industrialized construction is that a lot of industries tend to agglomerate, right? So, you want to work on AI, you're going to go to San Francisco, or you might go to Austin. You want to work in finance, obviously New York, Chicago. And I was just curious, like, are there hubs of innovation when it comes to the built environment, or are you starting to see like groups of people show up at the same place, work on similar problems, kind of share ideas? Is Charlotte one of those places that's kind of forthcoming as a hub of innovation in this area?
Yeah, well, I think that so there certainly are these kind of areas that tend to attract certain types of talent, as you mentioned, and I think that talent, whether they're focused directly on the built environment or adjacent areas, there's this opportunity to kind of zoom in and find those applications or solutions specific to construction, but it tends not to be on the residential side, right? And that it's hard to find that cluster of residential activity. What we think and what we're excited for about with Charlotte specifically is you do have this aggregation. The skyline is covered in companies that we come into contact with every day when we're building a house. And I think that those established industry players and the investments they're making in innovation set a solid foundation to attract more talent in with the right catalysts. And that's really what we're looking to do, is be that catalyst. Come in, have a conversation about taking what they've done so well over the last decades and elevating the discussion. And I think, and then incorporating some of those other stakeholder groups around it. So it's not just focus on the vertical pieces coming together, but all aspects of how we can collectively reduce the cost of housing and home ownership, or rentership in this case, right? So it's kind of bring that total cost of living down, if you will. And we have our partner on our startup competition, Pitch Fest, is based in the Charlotte market. That's Chris Langford with Home Technology Ventures, and he's deeply rooted in the community through his connections, formerly standing up Lawless Ventures when they had a corporate venture arm, and then spinning that out to become what Home Technology Ventures is today. There's a pretty wide view of what levers we can pull and dials we can turn to help bring that total cost of living down, and doing it by working together with us as the industry connection, and with Chris and his team as the capital deployment arm to help drive some of these solutions forward faster. So there's some really interesting conversations that we get to have, and our two worlds colliding, if you will, and then bringing it down into his backyard is what we're most excited about. Where I think, to your point, Jonathan, we can start to see some of that talent that's in that market. I mean, there's a lot of great 4-year programs and master's programs that exist in the North Carolina market. I think being able to get them to focus on solving for these housing opportunities is something that we can do together, and we're excited for.
Yeah, that sounds great. One of the things that we like to try to do here on Housing Insiders is inspire or plant the seed for founders, innovators, and entrepreneurs. And one of the things we want to make sure we talk about is your work in Pittsburgh. And you had mentioned the Picket Fence Concept Home. So I'm going to jump to that, if you don't mind, and tell us a little bit, putting all of the things that you've done these convenings and you've been working with all these people. And so in what I imagine is your very little free time, you went and did it yourself in a bunch of different ways. And the most recent is this concept house with a picket fence. So I got to ask about it, the origin story, and then also, what's been that experience building a picket fence house in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no, I love talking about this one, and now I can officially say it's an award-winning concept home, since we've chalked up our first trophy on the shelf, and I'm hoping there's more to come. But the picket fence, it started in some ways in 2012 when I was working overseas, and I learned about the opportunity to purchase vacant lots in the city of Pittsburgh through the sheriff's sale program. So there's thousands of vacant lots all over the city of Pittsburgh, like a lot of cities with an industrial legacy as ours, right? And it was fascinating to me that these lots, many of them seem to be in pretty decent locations near hospitals and universities, and in neighborhoods that were what seemed to be close to making a significant shift in inward migration. So went through the process of to understand how you acquire one of these lots, and with the intention of being able to build. And I always had this idea and desire to build, a few of my own projects here in the city of Pittsburgh to showcase kind of what could be within, what kind of housing opportunities we could create. I learned that is not a simple process. And I don't know that it's any easier now, but this took several years and the price escalated several times by the time it was completed. And then I learned that it's also quite expensive to let a vacant lot sit there for a while between taxes, insurance, and maintenance. That'll catch up with you quick. So there's a lot of things on that first acquisition I came to learn. And so fast forward a few years, I was at a ULI meeting in San Diego, and I met the team that started the American Home Study, and they just built their first concept home based off of wave 2 of the study. And I loved everything they did. It was by Garmin Homes in Raleigh, North Carolina, this beautiful home that incorporated a deep understanding of a very specific consumer group from every inch of the house. And I said, I love what you did. That's a consumer livability story that's unmatched. How about we take that same livability story and we marry it up against an industry constructability story? So you get this right and left glove. So it's a perfect match for the consumer, and you can deliver it profitably for the industry, right? And so I said, let's really swing the model. And they delivered that using a traditional construction method. Let's go full volumetric. And then we can kind of talk about all the solutions that end up in between when we build this house. So we set out, everybody really excited about this. And then in the beginning of 2023, we set out and toured a number of facilities in and around Pittsburgh that would be involved in this process. In March of 23, we set out to design it, and we designed it based off a third wave of the study that we ran collectively at the end of 2022. We had the opportunity to pick any number of the kind of generational cohorts that existed from the study findings. And we dialed in on what was called a trailblazer millennial as our ideal buying group. And that was based off of Kantar's mind-based program, which has an insane amount of buying behavior data on consumers, right? So we were able to take our survey data, overlay it with this consumer buying behavior data from Kantar, and basically understand who the most likely person to live in this zip code would be on that block. And so this was the Millennial Trailblazer. We designed the home to meet their needs. And one of the things that was important to us is we said, the lot was zoned for 2 units. So we said, don't give that up. We're talking about increasing household count in these communities. So we actually built the home right out the gate with the idea of having a integrated ADU on the ground floor and a 2-story townhome above that. So it became 2 units. So a couple of really important things there. One, all kinds of flexibility in the use ultimately by that trailblazer millennial profile. One, you could live upstairs, rent the downstairs, live upstairs, use the downstairs for work from home. You could also have mom and dad have a place to live. So it's a multi-gen opportunity. So a ton of flexibility. But it was really important to figure out that house hack as interest rates continued to increase. Buying a new home in that neighborhood at this size and to this level of finish would become incredibly difficult without those additional income offset opportunities, at least in the short term. And quite frankly, if you're really creative, you could flip the model. You could live in the ADU downstairs and rent the upstairs and probably be positive cash flow at the end of the month versus coming out of pocket. And then there was a lot of really interesting things we did when we brought the design into place. Big thing for us, a lot of these neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh, when a new developer will come in, they'll put the outdoor space on the roof or in the rear. All of our patios are in the front. Keep you connected and engaged with the community. We wanted folks to feel like we were trying to integrate in, not hide out. And there's certainly a sense of safety that comes along with having eyes on the street, right? So a lot of positives all the way around. A couple other things that were really important to us was when we built this house, since we were using offsite construction, we wanted to demonstrate not only the efficiencies in the process of moving a majority of the build into a factory, but we also wanted to demonstrate the ability to reduce the environmental impact of construction. I mean, just think about the reduction in number of trips to the site, the waste that is no longer on the site, and the disruption to the neighborhood. They were not thrilled when we brought the massive crane in and the 3 trucks, but we were gone in 4 days. Right? That's a lot quicker than anybody else would have been in and out. Now, we had some exterior button up and other work to do, but the point is the disruption was very, very limited. So again, in an urban environment like where we built this, I think this was really important. So great news. We set out with some very ambitious environmental goals around energy performance. We met the zero energy ready home standard from the Department of Energy. We were able to reduce the carbon footprint by almost 90%. And we were able to demonstrate that this can be done cost effectively. So it was really, really, really exciting for us. And we have two occupants in the house now. It's been turned into a bit of a living laboratory in partnership with the University of Pittsburgh. And so we have a couple living upstairs and a family living downstairs, and they are kind of engaging with us on a regular basis on if the house is performing as we anticipated to, not just from an indoor air quality and comfort perspective, but with the window placements, is it calming at the end of a stressful day? Do you have the workspace, the flexibility space that we intended for this particular unit to have based off where these folks are in their life and where they are kind of in their personal and professional cycle? So it was a really fun and exciting project. And the most important piece of it was we walked the talk. We partnered with a professional builder and published every step of the journey. So this wasn't something that we did and then kept to ourselves. We made all the data publicly available. We made the entire process publicly available. It had its own microsite for a period of time on ProBuilder's website. It has since been taken down, but there's still a ton of content available about the project. And we're in the process of kind of opening up a whole nother conversation around being able to experience this house and what this house can mean for communities all over the country.
So I'm going to ask a weird question, Dennis, but something that I joke about a lot, which is that if everybody who's busy talking about the supply issue would just go out and build a home, we wouldn't have a supply issue. And I say that a little bit as a joke, but something that Jeremy and I have talked a lot about is like, should we walk the talk and should we go be developers? And so it sounds to me like you've blazed a really important trail. You've done all the hard work to figure out how to make this happen. And you also said that there's a lot of these, empty lots, missing teeth, as you say, in various Pittsburgh neighborhoods that are, turning around. And there's certainly a demand for Pittsburgh as it's growing as a bit of a tech hub around Carnegie Mellon and other things. So should I go build a house there? Like, is it practical? Would I make some money if I just went out there and started building homes there?
In Pittsburgh? I mean, there's certainly opportunities to do this. I would encourage you. Come on in. I have a few lots we can start on right now if you want to. There's a lot of dynamics that you have to take into consideration. There's a lot of, in Pittsburgh specifically, there were some things that we did, that were misunderstood from a planning perspective that we had to iron out. And it would definitely influence what we do the next time around. I think that what we did it was a concept house, right? And I think, but there's ways, just like a concept car, you can take 10, 15, 20% and add it into the next project, like the best of what we did, and you can have a very significant impact on both the consumer or the occupant of the home and the profitability of the project. So yeah, I would say that it is a repeatable. There are elements of what we did that are absolutely repeatable, and that we are actually as an organization looking to replicate as we go into next year. So we have our with wave 4 completed of the study. We are in the process of thinking through what the next round of concept homes will look like. We are going to take a different approach. I always say let the project decide the system, but you need to be thinking somewhat with the type of systems in mind. Otherwise, you end up with a design you got to kind of completely revamp. But we are looking at doing a more of a high added value panelized approach. So high content, complete structural envelope solution that'll come prefabricated from a factory. So so again, moving a little bit further towards the traditional side, but still keeping things from more of a modern method or advanced method of construction.
But you're not doing this for fun. I mean, I imagine part of doing a concept house is so that others can do it again and do it at scale. Is that, am I thinking about that right? Is the hope that you publish this and see how it works, and that you get more people coming in and repeating the same process?
Absolutely. I think there's things that we learn I strongly believe there's things that we learn on this journey that are applicable to our high volume builders,
Mm-hmm.
as well as small scale developers and infill and looking for infill opportunities. They're going to be different, but I think there's some things that do overlap those two audiences. So I think that not only does it play into, a broad swath of the Housing Innovation Alliance network, but also folks that just want to see change in their own neighborhood. And so we're trying to empower small builders and developers to think differently about what's available to them and how they implement these projects, get municipalities and the neighborhood and the community to think differently about these solutions that are being implemented. And then also, like I said, our broader network to look at some of the technologies and solutions that are scalable for the folks that are building 5, 10, 15,000 homes in an annual basis.
Well, that's a perfect segue. I think we'll take a quick break. We'll hear from our sponsor, our support, and then we'll be right back with the question.
Built Rewards is a payment platform for housing that rewards members in their home and neighborhood. Built is the payment platform for over 5 million units because Built provides incredible value to residents and to property owners and managers that use it. Properties using Built have seen reduced turnover, increased usage of electronic payments, and fewer missed payments. And with our latest resident loyalty program, Built is changing the way that property managers can reward good behavior. Managers can assign rewards and benefits to tenants for a variety of activities like early lease renewal. If you're interested in learning more, go to alliance.builtrewards.com.
All right, we're back with Dennis. We ended right there, Dennis, on this thought of the complexity of what you did and the complexity of that for other cities. And I wanted to use that as a segue to ask you really about two things. One is, that's one of the things we always hear. I'm not going to say as an excuse, but as a reason that innovation or progress doesn't scale in housing is because it's so local. It's so dependent on the lot, the municipality, and all of these other things that stack up. And in some ways, what I'm hearing as trends are starting to challenge that notion that we actually should do a better job thinking about this nationally, even though it will be applied differently locally by developers or other entrepreneurs as they look around. So I'm curious if you are feeling that as true, if you have any kind of trends that you're looking at, major trends that are coming together that you would say, yeah, we actually think this is changing and something about the timing right now is different than ever before.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a great point. So there's no one size fits all approach, but there are certainly some things that we can do to harmonize the industry from state to state, market to market, right? And I think couple things that kind of stuck with me when I first came back from my work in the Middle East was there was a lot of emphasis on housing supply being solved through kind of mega factories and lots of them. So scale quick, deliver high volume, and then figure out the soft landing so that you can kind of slowly and strategically wrap up these facilities as they've met their end of life. When I came back to the U.S., there was a lot of talk about that here as well, right? I think you'll remember some of the companies, and some of them are still out there. I think there's a time and a place for that, but I don't think it's for all. And I think that there's the idea of kind of localized microfactories that are designed with a much lower capital investment and a much more tailored and targeted production output, let's say in the 200 to 400 units per year range, open up a ton of opportunities. So I think thinking through home delivery and the implementation of the convergence of technology to solve for that in an offsite manner through that approach makes a ton of sense. One, now this is something that an individual builder or a joint development of a handful can go in and kind of de-risk the deployment of. It's easier to kind of pallet keeping that through a downturn if you need to. And then I think the other piece, if you add in kind of the leadership we're seeing at the state level, I'll reference the state of Colorado and what they've done through the Innovative Housing Incentive Program, and as an easy one from our two events that we held there in partnership with the Office of Economic Development, International Trade. What we saw is the idea where states are actively seeking to relocate companies that have an advanced building technology and actively seeking to scale existing operations in their state that have proven themselves out, and then just helping to make them more cost effective or more accessible, and then creating also a demand side component to the conversation so that these opportunities that they've brought to market have an outlet, right? So I think the state leadership combined with this idea of these microfactories is really, really an interesting opportunity that we're going to start to see evolve over the next few years. And then if you layer in the idea of all the foreign investment coming into the US market, specifically Asian capital, and maybe more detail to really dial in, I think Japan's really been in the headlines over the last few years, right? And they've not been doing it quietly. I mean, these are public acquisitions that are very sizable, but there's a certain respect for investing in an organization, observing how it performs, and then slowly turning the dial. And I think that the patience, the long-term view that these organizations have, and the understanding they already have of industrialized construction and process. Granted, they're still very different operating environments, but when you bring that mentality and that operating model into the country or into our landscape, I think, and you layer it in with these other two items I just mentioned, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in housing to be unlocked. That will still be a local and state solution, but if we can, somebody, Jonathan, you mentioned earlier, if we can get everybody who builds one house to build 10, we've done pretty well, right? And I think these solutions will start to continue to empower the smaller players and enable the larger ones. One other thing that kind of underpins all this too, that we've seen evolve through our startup competition, is the codification of the wisdom of the industry and how that applies. So everybody talks about the graying out, and there's a lot of wisdom that will be left if we don't capture it today. And I think there's a lot of platforms, if you think out there, that are from young founders, where they're saying, look, there's talent there. We can codify this. We can put this into a program, the division that performs the best land acquisition strategies, and then translate that across divisions. There's a company called ARCS that's kind of thinking through that model now. On3 that does the same thing within kind of on-site training and standards and kind of superpowers your superintendents, right? I think there's this opportunity. So leveraging technology that we all have in our pockets and turning it into a power tool. Those ideas, that's where we're going to see some of that capturing the wins and the early adoption. Is one, you're making it's easier to invest in, it's easier to see the immediate results, and it's solving real problems today.
I think that's amazing. I mean, first of all, that was awesome. And I hope our listeners enjoyed that as much as I did. That's such an optimistic view in all the aspects and ways that industrialized construction can grow in our country. You said something that was interesting, given your experience in Saudi Arabia, where factories are they're massive. They're building at great scale. And one of the things I've always sort of thought about is that, obviously, if you can build at scale, you can drive down costs, you can drive down you make it more efficient. But because of the state and local, often building code differences, it's hard to do that here. Is your thought that it sounds like what you're saying is the way to go is to start with this micro factory, easier to invest in, less risky, rather than solving for the things that make it impossible to do a factory that can really scale the quantity? Did I hear you right? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, well, I'm not suggesting that it's the only solution or the only approach. I think it's the one that allows us to move the quickest, right? They're easier to stand up. They're easier to replicate once you and with each replication, you get smarter version. Each iteration gets you get a little bit better. You learn from the last one and so on. So the fact that you can stand them up quick and keep moving, and because of the fact that you mentioned, we right now we still do need to focus on that harmonization of the industry across from market to market, and until we get there, we can't wait for that to happen to start solving these problems. So I think that the microfactory approach is one tool in the toolbox that helps us get to where we want to go.
And the market in Saudi Arabia, just out of curiosity, like the market there, given the way that land acquisition, the way that construction works there, was more favorable to building factories at scale, or the capital, like, was that your experience, that it just was such a different landscape that you didn't have to go the microfactory route?
Yeah, well, no, I think the larger capital deployment interest was in we want to build more, we want to build faster, so we need the volume they were looking to achieve could come from these larger operating entities, and it was thinking more of like the production of a car or an airplane than the traditional thought of building a home. And so the idea there was lots of gigafactories, very very quick, to help get the problem solved as fast as possible, and then, like I said, create a soft landing opportunity. So we'd have Gantt charts that were much taller than they were wide,
Yeah.
because you're just running 1,000 concurrent activities to get these things built out. I'm not, and I think over time, that's the initial projects I was working on in Saudi Arabia with the Ministry of Housing, was kind of thinking through that from the building technology stimulus perspective, which was really, how do we find models that work in other markets, de-risk the transfer of that technology into the Saudi market, and then scale it as quickly as possible. When I exited the market, I would say that a few of the larger factories had been built. There were folks that already had kind of the makings of a microfactory, and in some ways they may have already had their own microfactories from creating some of the like the remote work facilities that were required in the old oil and gas industry. So they already had some of the capability, not only of building the vertical, but they also knew how to do the horizontal and the planning. So there's kind of this vertically integrated approach at the smaller scale that was working for certain companies that were already supplying a certain industry. Now it's just kind of changing that and saying, how do we take that and apply it to a starter home? And we can get into a whole long list of things on the differences there. But when we were working there, a starter home was roughly 5,000 square feet, and there was some things that was acceptability and affordability were two things we constantly had to kind of battle. And that's just it was something that had just been grown into the community, where generation after generation the homes had grown significantly, and then it was kind of bringing them back down into a price point that was more attainable by the masses, because there was a significant housing shortage for those that required housing that was what would be considered market rate for entry level.
So one of the things that I'm trying to put a question around is this inherent tension that's implied in what you said, which is we want to be able to know things quickly. We want to be able to learn things quickly and then adapt either that idea or that framework for the next one and the next one. But we're in this complex, really hard and pretty long process. We're trying to make the timeline shorter, but it's still a pretty long process. And so I'm curious, one example would be microfactories. Do you have any other examples, at the ready, where you're seeing that gap between trying an idea or having a founder who wants to start something in the built environment and established home builders at scale, finding out about it, absorbing it, being able to try it, being able to see it? Because my understanding is we still have a pretty large gap between how we test ideas and get them safe and sound and scalable into the hands of people who can put 20, 30, 200, 400 houses into a market in a year. What else are you seeing bridge that gap? Or what else should I be thinking about in terms of how to get exposure for these ideas, when it can be really hard to test something one at a time, or a piece of a house or a piece of the built environment? What should we be thinking about there?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things, right? So early on in my career, you learn that it's like the gatekeepers, the trades, right? So if you can understand, if there's a new solution that needs to be implemented, certainly you want the buy-in from the builder, who's ultimately going to have to market and sign off on it. But you really need to understand those that are going to work with it, and how does it change their process? Doesn't matter how good the widget is, if the person who invented the widget doesn't understand the implications of the change management that's about to take place on both the internal and the external organization. And that, I think, is something that is oftentimes overlooked. And because it's just, I think there's an assumption that if this saves money, if this performs better, it's more readily available, that it's kind of an easy to adopt. But these are all large organizations that are set up, that evolved over years. And when and even you mentioned the fragmentation of the entire ecosystem, there's a lot of minds that have to be moved. So start fundamentally with the one that's going to have to work with it, understand their pain points and the process that it's going to improve for them. And if it doesn't, then maybe it's not the right process. Now there's a whole other mindset where we can scrap all that and do it completely differently, which is, I'm not saying that's a very viable path. Does that, that level of disruption is a completely different approach, and that is an augmentation to existing supply, right? So what does the evolving housing technology solution mix look like? You think of integrating solutions around like 3D printing and other technologies, like that helps us. Does that take us from our million starts a year to 1.1? Probably doesn't displace the 1 million. That continues, right? And then over time, as the industry continues to evolve and some of the workforce transitions from being, kind of the traditional workforce we think of today into and it modernizes, what does that look like? And how does the technology solution mix continue to evolve? But I think really that emphasis on the change management implementation at the organizational level. And if you look at we've conducted some research with Ivory Innovations and Pro Builder on the top 200 builders in the country by closings. And we found that over the last 2 years, there was a couple of significant things that jumped out at us. So we started this last year, and we saw that 25% of the top 200 builders had a dedicated innovation function. And that ranged in size and scale, right? That could have been a national team all the way down to half an FTE, right? And then we were pleasantly surprised to see that in 2025, when we got the updated study results, that number was up to 33%. So now we're seeing an increase, and we believe we're going to keep seeing that number grow. So one, the internal capability to assess, converse, and roll out within my organization is coming into play. So that changes the landscape for how we think about innovation. So it's kind of like I said, we've been around since 2008. I think we were the first ones having these conversations. Maybe the market wasn't as ready to listen to us as they are now. The time is right. We must strike today. And so maybe that's just where I am in my career. I believe we're at a tipping point. I think we're going to see that. And the additional data we saw within the research we conducted was if you look at the 10 areas of focus for innovation, the 5 heaviest weighted areas were an internal shift, almost directly related to sales. The other 5 that they're watching and going to start to emphasize over the next 3 to 5 years had an external focus and was very focused on the build. I thought that was a really interesting takeaway. Not surprising in many ways, but what it demonstrates is the better we get at working some of these things through internally, the better we're going to get at working them through externally. So we're building up a culture that's comfortable with this uncertainty and taking some of this risk and failing forward, which is phenomenal. And that's what we need to start being able to do. We need to build, we talk about resilience in housing. We need resilience in the organization. And we need to find ways to create models that reward division leaders that take on these opportunities and that work with the founders and that dedicate the time with the trades. And the same for the trades that take the time and energy. And we're at it, so I think from a timing perspective, you take that cultural shift in, and you also think about the fact where we're at in a lot of the kind of the life cycles of these firms, and you have a succession plan taking place as well, which the next generation of leadership's coming in. They have another 20-year runway. They're looking at doing things differently than their predecessors because now it's, the game is changing. And I think these innovation teams are going to become table stakes across the industry. So these are some of the things that, without getting into a specific product that you're, and if that's what you're pulling me for, I'm going to avoid that one. But I think there's a mindset opportunity that's evolving. And the other piece, I'll just hit on that really quickly too, is I said this during a keynote speech or an opening at PCBC earlier this year, and it was kind of like, we get this really bad rap because we don't innovate. I disagree with that in a lot of ways, because what's the risk reward ratio of promoting your innovation right now? We hear, as soon as you do something and it doesn't work, everybody wants to beat you up over it. They don't celebrate what you learned. They want to hold you out in public square and slog you, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, it's an
So
incentive
why
right?
do
Yeah.
that?
What's the incentive? And unless we change the incentive, we will not get a different outcome, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're seeing though now, and that research is indicating it, there's more firms publicly announcing investments in new technologies because there's more firms that have seen success with those investments. So as we continue to see those cycles, we're going to continue to, I think, hear a lot more bets that have been placed that nobody knew about. So my point there is, I think we've been innovating. I don't think we get enough credit for the innovations we've been. Now, is there opportunity to digitize? Absolutely. Is there opportunities to improve process? Absolutely. Has productivity lagged? Yeah. Okay. But that's not all our fault. We don't control the regulatory environment. And tell me how much of that has impacted that productivity, right? So there's parts and pieces that, when we hear this, and I think, and I hope the folks that are out there that are at university now and looking for their first home here shortly kind of understand what these headlines all mean and how that translates down. And I'm not saying we should take the foot off the gas trying to solve all these different problems. And that's why we have the number of events and support from teams like yours at each of those events to have these conversations. But the reality is, it's not, I think everybody knows, it's not as clean and simple as, just push a button and it's solved. There's a lot of moving parts in the fragmentation. But I think we're on the right track. And I think in short, I think we deserve more credit than we give ourselves.
I mean, Dennis, everything you're saying really resonates, and it's really encouraging. I mean, I love the way you're thinking about it. I love hearing that the industry is making more of these investments. I want to give you a chance to say to our audience what they can do to get involved, either with you or with. I know Jeremy and I are going to go build homes. We've decided that already. But if people aren't going to do
Pittsburgh,
that,
right?
In Detroit, Michigan, close enough.
maybe
Detroit,
Cleveland, yeah. But in any case, Dennis, how do people get involved with what you're doing? What website should they go to? What should they be doing?
Yeah, well, certainly they can reach out to me directly, Dennis at housinginnovation.org. Check us out on the website, www.housinginnovationalliance.com, and would be happy to see them, join us at one of our upcoming events or connect at one of the other industry conferences we'll be attending. And I think the best thing is, Jeremy, you mentioned like what it was like to sit at this summit, and I appreciate the kind things you said, but a lot of energy goes into qualifying everybody that's in the room too, right? So it's a part of that is it's the perspectives, but it's that mindset, and so always looking to meet folks that want to get out on the edge, want to have these conversations, put their heart into it, and again, that willingness to share is the biggest piece, because we can all go a lot further faster if we do it together.
Thank you, Dennis, so much for being on the show today. Really great having you.
That would be great inspiration. We really appreciate your perspective and all the hard work. I mean, it has been absolutely inspiring. So thank you for being here.
That's going to do it for today's episode. We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com. If you like what you hear, please leave us a review.
And hit subscribe so that more episodes from Housing Insiders find their way to your feed. And thank you, as always, to Keenan Chen for the music.